you can only directly see the world from where you're standing, right? If you're stood in one place, it gives you a perspective, and you can talk to other people and hear their perspectives and their vantage points, but there's no direct substitute for actually shifting your own location.
I have this crazy goal of getting this podcast to over 10,000 subscribers in the next 3 months. Here's how you can help. Over 96.6% of people that view this podcast are not subscribed. So if you've got even a little bit of information or inspiration from this podcast, I please ask you to subscribe. Help me help more people, and let's get into the podcast. Zuby, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, man. I'm excited to jump into your journey. I'd love to start early on. You are the youngest of five, grew up in Saudi Arabia. You went around and were in a bunch of different places. What were some pivotal moments in your childhood that shaped the person I'm speaking with today?
Yeah, man, sure thing. So, first of all, thank you for having me on, man. Good to talk to you. A pleasure. So, wow, I guess the first formative moment would have been one that I don't even remember. I
Mm.
guess it would have been my family making the decision to move to Saudi Arabia. It's not a typical place that a lot of people grow up in. And I often think, what would my life have looked like if my parents didn't make that decision, right? If I had just grown up in either the UK and gone to school there from day one, or if I had grown up in Nigeria and I'd just been in that nation and that culture and went to school there, I'd be genetically the same human being, but I'd be a very different person in a lot of ways. All of the perspectives and the sort of global viewpoints that I have, everything down to my accent, maybe even my appearance in some ways would probably be different. I always think it's interesting to think how these little pivotal things that happen early on in our lives in particular alter our entire trajectory. For example, if you went to a different school than whatever school you went to, perhaps you'd have, a different circle of friends. There's people who you would know that you don't currently know. There's tons of people who you currently know that you wouldn't know, and so on. So it's an interesting question. That was definitely a pivotal part. And then I guess going to boarding school at the age of 11, that was also pretty pivotal. So I went to lots of different schools. I went to two different schools in Saudi Arabia, and then I went to two different schools in the UK before I went to university. Each of those was its own experience. I've got different people I know, different groups of friends from each of those places. Of course, I studied at Oxford University and started my music career there. I've got I know so many people, and I'm connected to a ridiculous amount of people in the real world just because I've spent so much time in so many different places. I think another hugely pivotal part of my life, and into my adulthood now, but that was making the decision to leave my corporate job in 2011 and become self-employed, start out my own company, CEO of entertainment, and just take this big jump in my early to mid 20s to go pursue my music full time with no plan B, really. I wasn't, I remember when I was leaving my corporate job, a lot of people were like, how much time are you going to give it? Are you going to give it a year? Are you going to give it 2 years, 3 years, whatever? I was like, you guys don't get it. I'm gone. Like, this is it. It's sink or swim to me. And so I would have been about 24 years old at that time. And it was just like, cool, like this is it. I have no plans to ever be employed again by anybody, at least not in any traditional sense. And for the past 13 years at this point now, I've been on this independent journey. And again, the reason why that's so pivotal is most likely if I had just stayed in that corporate job, then 99% of the people who now know me and have heard about me never would have, right? I would have just been another corporate guy, cool, making decent money, but I wouldn't have any impact on the world. I wouldn't have reached, millions of followers. I wouldn't be doing all the cool things and all the fun adventures that have come downstream of that simple decision to just leave that job and go create my own adventure. It would have just sort of closed off this entire path that people now know me for. So those would be a handful of things that I consider very pivotal.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into 2011 to 2019, 2020, that whole journey in itself. Cause like you said right there, it's a lot of people are thinking, how much time are you going to give yourself? But there was no time limit. And that commitment to yourself is something I think a lot of people, I say is a lot of people are interested in making change, but not many are committed. And when you break that off and you take that leap, that's what the difference is. One thing that I've seen from a lot of the interviews that you've done is your parents were really pivotal in who you become as a person. They've supported you throughout it all, really, and were like your mom's the first person to buy the music, all that kind of stuff. What were some of the values that they incorporate into you as a person? Because you seem to be someone that's really open to changing your beliefs, but also open to standing in the beliefs that you hold. So I'm curious what values they placed into you.
Yeah, absolutely. So both of my parents are very strong believers in the Christian faith. Their marriage and our family dynamics have always been grounded in that. So those principles, some of the core principles about, you know, loving God, loving your family, honoring your father and mother, loving other people and treating other people as you yourself would like to be treated, loving your neighbors, and also the very radical notion of loving your enemies or those who oppose you, because that's certainly not something that is a natural inclination of human beings or throughout the animal species. It's very counterintuitive. I would say other things. I think honesty was a very important part. One thing when it comes to discipline, I really think my parents did a fantastic job with all five of us. Um, what they did is, I remember it when I was growing up. I'd go. A lot of my friends, I felt like their parents would sometimes just have very arbitrary rules.
Hmm.
So I don't know. There would be a rule that you could drink like water or any other drink or whatever. You could drink downstairs, but you couldn't drink upstairs.
Yeah.
And it's like it's the same carpet, it's the same floor, it's the same whatever. It's like arbitrary. So they'd have like sometimes they'd have more rules than I had, but they'd all be sort of enforced in a kind of half-ass way.
Hmm.
Whereas with my parents, like in our family, they just kind of drilled in very simple fundamentals, right? Like, you know, no violence, right? No violence, no theft, no lying, right? You don't lie. You don't lie to other people. You don't lie to your parents. You don't whatever. If you do something, you own up to it and you take responsibility for it. They also drilled, I think, without even sort of explicitly saying it, but just the idea of work ethic, right? Like you work hard and you get rewarded for your hard work in general. They also drilled into me that life is not fair, right? So generally you'll be rewarded for your hard work, but also, bad things happen to good people. There's things that happen that we don't understand. If you look at the world in all sorts of ways, the world is not fair, right? We're all born into different situations at different times, to different families in different nations, right? Simply by being born in a country like the United States or the UK versus being born, in a village in Somalia or in, North Korea. Like we didn't pick that, right? Like that there people born in North Korea, that's not their fault, that's not their bad. It's extremely unfair. It's extremely unfair that millions of people are born in the USA and millions of people are then born in North Korea. It's unfair that some people are born to, parents with severe drug addictions or who are, abusive or who abandon them or whatever, whereas other people are born into extremely stable situations. Like all of these things are not fair, let alone how the world proceeds as time goes on. Um, but they taught me that. So I guess I had a sense of justice instilled whilst also having it tempered by this idea of ultimately life is still not fair, but certainly it's purposeful, it's meaningful. So I think those are some of the sort of core values and teachings and lessons that I remember from early. And what that did is it meant that even when I got into, like I left home at 11 to go to boarding school,
Yeah.
which in hindsight, like at the time, it didn't seem weird at all because all of my siblings did the same thing.
Hmm.
And like going to boarding school was a very normal thing where I grew up in Saudi Arabia. Like every single person went to boarding school. The only thing is I went 4 or 5 years earlier than most other people. But when I talk to people now, I'm very aware that, okay, like if I sort of explain my life story, they're like, man, like you were flying overseas by yourself at 11 years old and being thousands of miles away from your parents for, from the age of 11 to 20 for the most part. It's not normal per se. But I think that I feel like the lessons I was already taught I feel like by the time I was 11 or 12, I was already able to have a very firm grasp on what was right versus what was wrong. My parents knew that they could count on me and count on us, my other siblings included, to not go crazy just because we were away from our family, right? You might think, oh, sending off an 11-year-old kid or 12-year-old or a 15-year-old to a whole other country where there's no direct parental supervision, right? Like they're just going to go crazy. They're going to get caught up in drinking and drugs and, all of this other crazy stuff. And I don't even think my parents were slightly concerned about that. Like they didn't need to be. And yeah, there were people who I went to school with or who I went to university with who got involved in that kind of stuff. But for me, it was never even it wasn't even really a temptation. It was just like, no, not interested. Like that doesn't interest me. Just because I see other people doing stupid or criminal or goofy stuff, I'm not going to go and copy it because I just had instilled in me, you know, what is right, what is wrong, what are the things you should get involved in, what are the things that you should stay away from. It was just kind of that sense of wisdom that was instilled in me, and it's still there. So shout out to my parents. They did a good job with that.
Yeah, shout out to your parents, man. That's why I wanted to touch on it because it seems like they've had such a massive role. I think a lot of people don't grow up with many role models, especially in that way where they can trust you at 11 years old, even.
Mm.
And you leaving that young, right? There was a Twitter post that you posted recently. Every young man should obtain a passport ASAP if he doesn't already have one. And like that, the travel has had such a massive impact on you. What has that? Because you've been to 43 countries now, or is it more at this point?
Yeah,
Yeah, around
yeah,
there.
that sounds about right. 42, 43, something like that.
Yeah, so like you've traveled a bunch and even starting at an early age and where you lived from where you were born to begin with. How has traveled helped you expand as a person? Because I can imagine starting young too is
Mm.
extraordinary.
Yeah, well, I think there are the things that are more sort of superficial and obvious, like getting to see different places and understand different cultures and talk to different types of people and all that. And those are all huge positives. I think on a deeper level, the most important value that people get from traveling is it enhances two things which I think are extremely important, and those are perspective and gratitude.
Mhm.
So the thing is, every single person in the world, like if you're born and you're raised somewhere, that is your default, right? So everyone has a default, right? Whatever city, state, country you were born in, grow up in, people tend to think, especially in the absence of travel, that that's just like that's normal, right?
Of course.
That's what most places and that's what most people are like. And no matter where you grow up, that's not going to be correct. It doesn't even matter where you are. It's just like, if you were born and grew up in Beijing, and you assume, okay, most of the world and people are like Beijing, that's not going to be accurate, right? It doesn't matter. It could be London. It could be, and pick your country, pick your city. Most people in the world have quite a different experience.
Yeah.
Um, and so what it does is it expands your perspective. It expands your reference points essentially, because you can only directly see the world from where you're standing, right? If you're stood in one place, it gives you a perspective, and you can talk to other people and hear their perspectives and their vantage points, but there's no direct substitute for actually shifting your own location, right?
Mhm.
You could even imagine this on a smaller scale. If you're looking out at a landscape, you can only see as far as your eyes can see, and you can describe what you're seeing around you. But then if you go and you stand over there, you've now got a different perspective, and you can see things that you didn't see before. You can see the things that were behind you previously. And so the more different points you can stand at, the more different ways you can see the world. So I find that it builds empathy, it builds understanding, because even if there's some foreign, think of whatever human culture you might consider the most opposite or foreign to your own. If you were to go to that place and be amongst those people and talk to them and see how it is and whatever, even if you don't fully understand it or you don't agree with it or whatever the case may be, you'll just build more empathy of like, okay, that's why they do things like that. Okay, that's why they believe that. Okay, that's why they have that tradition, and that's why it's like this. And it just all helps to build your picture of the world. It helps you. Imagine you have a picture of the world and it's like ultra blurry. It's all blurry, right? Have you ever played have you ever played like a real time strategy game? I don't know, like a Command and Conquer or something like that.
I've probably seen
Um,
something like that. Yeah.
yeah. So they used to be, you know, how old are you, James?
I'm 20.
You're 20. Okay. So, you know, this is where there might be like a little bit of an age gap, right? But when I
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
teenager, you know, the games people love to play, there was like Command and Conquer, Age of Empires, all these games, and
Yep.
you know, you build a military base, and you know, you're going off whatever. But the map is all blurry, right? The map is all blurry. You're in a certain location, you can just see what's around you, and then as you expand and you grow, you know, over time, you can see more and more of the map. So imagine like you're born and you're in a certain place, and the world is it's blurry. And it was even more blurry prior to the internet and social media because people were not communicating across, you know, countries in the way that they do now. But then it's like, okay, you go explore that place, and over time the resolution sort of turns up. So yeah, no one is going to have a wholly accurate picture of the world and all the people in it, but you can sort of increase the resolution by traveling. What it also does is the second thing I brought up is gratitude. So I think this is particularly important for people growing up and living in developed countries because I think oftentimes, look, we all can take things, we all can and do take things for granted.
Absolutely.
Right. The fact that we are able to sit here and record this podcast is quite close to miraculous. Right. We can be in completely different locations, hundreds, thousands of miles away from each other. And then we can go and we can share it with other people, and we can all do this for cheap or for free. The fact that, you know, you hit the switch and the light comes on, the fact that you turn the faucet and clean water comes out, the fact, like the amount of opportunities that we have in the developed world. If you look historically or you look around the globe, you realize that this is the complete anomaly. Right? Most people are living in a situation much closer to poverty than to the way that we live. So something that you probably see a lot is like we're pretty much in the group of like we are the 1%.
Yeah.
Right? We're the 1%. I think statistically around the globe, I think to be in the global 1%, I like if you take income, for example, I think if you earn over, it's somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000. I think if you earn more than that globally, you're actually in the top 1% of income earners in the entire world, right? Yeah. And that's a sense of perspective, right? Because people are there like, oh my gosh, I can't get by on 80 grand a year or whatever. And when you think, gosh, like, you know, and you might even have someone who's there and they're screaming and complaining about the 1%, not seeing that they themselves are in the 1% because they have no perspective. Or when you get the people who are saying like, you know, America is the worst country in the world and everything is terrible and this and this and this. And you're just like, what are you comparing to? Are you comparing to the perfect utopia? Or are you comparing to your own country in the past? Or are you comparing to all of the 196 or so countries in the world? Because if you're doing that, you'll see like, oh my gosh, I'm actually blessed to be living in this place at this time. I'm so grateful we have constant electricity and the roads are made of concrete and they're not full of potholes, and I can go and I can choose what I want to pursue, whether I am a man, I'm a woman, I'm this color, I'm this ethnicity, whatever age I am, I can do this, right? The idea that a 20-year-old is able to do what you're doing right now and to connect to the people you're connecting to, whatever, like this is not all of these things are not things to be balked at. This isn't just like a given that, I mean, you think you could go back 20, 30, 50, 100, 200, any other time in human history, what we are doing right now was impossible. It did not exist, right? And so are certain things harder or more challenging now than maybe they were 50 years ago? For sure. But on the grand scheme of things, we're all just so blessed. Like we're incredibly blessed. And I think that when you travel, it makes it incredibly obvious. It makes it incredibly obvious. But what it also does is it also helps you see the things that can be improved. Right? There's no perfect country. There's no perfect city. The USA has a lot of flaws. My country, the UK, has a lot of flaws. Lots of great things, lots of bad things as well. And what you can do is you can see, okay, cool. You have a clear perspective of these are the things that we're doing really, really well at, and these are the things that are great. And then you can also go to other places, and there might be something you see in their culture, or the way that their laws are set up, or the way that they view the family, or the way that they view certain things. You can be like, actually, you know what? That's something we need more of. That's something that we need more of back home, right? Oh, why don't we? What about this idea? What about that idea? And I think that if people do that at scale, then individually and collectively, we're all better off, because people are more gracious and people have a better perspective. And I think that that's how you can truly improve things. I think that entitlement mentality is extremely common right now. And I think it's extremely destructive. I think that in the modern West, we do an incredible amount of just sort of navel gazing and pontificating and fighting over stuff that is really not substantial. Like, it's just random nonsense. Like, people are so desperate for struggle that they're like inventing it themselves.
Yeah.
And I think people don't realize that when they're doing it themselves, because they just don't have that perspective, right? It's why you get so many people who maybe in like their 20s or whatever, they'll travel for the first time, and I don't know, they'll go on a mission trip or a charity trip or something, right? They'll go to a developing country somewhere where there's like a lot more genuine poverty or whatever, and they'll always come back like, oh my gosh, like I'm a whole different human being, right? Just seeing people living like that, but seeing people living like that and still getting on with it as well, and realizing that, okay, it's not money that creates, it's not money directly that creates happiness, because someone will go and they'll travel to Ethiopia, or they'll go and travel to Sudan, or they'll go and travel to some parts of Central or South America or whatever, and they're like, gosh, people here are happier than my friends back home in the USA. Like, you're seeing how little they have, yet they're still
Yes.
happy, and it's like, wait, how am I going to be constantly complaining about my life and saying I'm depressed and saying this and this and this, when objectively my life is so much more comfortable and easy than all of these millions or billions of people. Um, so I think at the root, I think that's why I'm so pro travel. I'm so pro, just like, man, just go see the world, right? You're not going to make it to every single country, but just going to a few others, especially some that are quite dissimilar from your own. But even the ones that are similar, you can still learn a lot from. I just think that the thing is, there's just no substitute for it. It's good to read books. It's good to go on Wikipedia. It's good to Google things. It's good to talk to people from different places. But there's just no real substitute to actually just doing the thing. And I find that the more resistant people are to doing it, the more they need it. The people who are most resistant and who to travel, who are like, man, I don't need to ever go anywhere else, or say, I'm like, that's the person who actually needs it the most.
Absolutely. I think we also need we feel like we need a lot more preparation than we do than just saying, okay, I'm going to book this trip and just jump for it. Like by the end of
Yeah.
this week, I'm going to Costa Rica for a few weeks because of that exact reason. Is I
Awesome.
mortality was a big thing for me that helped me with perspective because I lost my father and uncle both at 37. My grandfather
Mm.
passed really young as well. So like mortality was something that instilled perspective into me, and also I've been doing gratitude walks every day just to feel the gratitude rather than just saying the gratitude. I think we overvalue the this is what I'm grateful for, writing it down, but not really feeling it and actually like experiencing it. And I think travel is a massive part of that. That's why I was curious about your journey because you've not only traveled throughout your life young because that was a part of your life, but you actively going out and doing it is such a big proponent. And the perspective and gratitude, I think, are two things that are both under our control that are really shape the direction of our lives, which I absolutely love. I want to dive into you leaving corporate at 2011, going full
Hmm.
time into music, as you said earlier. That journey in itself, I could assume because I know that when you left, you hadn't made more money than your corporate job until 2019 to 2020, right? So that whole journey in itself, a lot of people have their expectations, limiting beliefs, everything. Take me through your internal narrative, leaving that job and stepping into music. I know you were making money, but it wasn't everything.
Yeah, man, fantastic question, and I like the fact that you've definitely done your research here. So I started making music actually I released my first album in 2006, which is crazy because it's like half a lifetime ago, and it
Yeah.
really doesn't seem that long. I was still in university at the time. So the truth is, by the time I had graduated university at the age of 20, I already knew what I wanted to do. Right, I'd fallen in love with music at the time, and I'd sold a few thousand copies of my CDs, and built up a tiny little buzz and everything. So by the time I graduated, I was already like, cool, I want to be a rapper. I want to use my voice to positively uplift and inspire other people. So after I graduated, I took out 1 year and I did my music full time for a year. I already had a job offer, but I deferred it for 1 year and said, cool, I'll accept it, but give me a year to just do some music stuff and tour a little and have fun with it. So let me get my numbers straight here. So I started work in the corporate world. I was a management consultant in from 2008 to 2011. During that time, I was still juggling my music stuff on the time. And then what happened is by early 2011, I can remember this well. I remember January 2011, doing my sort of New Year's resolutions. My big one was just, okay, by the end of this year, I want to be a full-time musician. And it was kind of scary because for someone in my early 20s, I mean, I wasn't making amazing money, but I was making good money, and I was on a very clear path of progression. And it was like, cool, I can just keep doing this and I can have a kind of comfortable, predictable life. The best way I can describe it when I was in that environment, and this is not a knock to anyone who lives in the corporate world, but we're all wired differently. I've always been a creative, entrepreneurial person. And for me personally, it felt like how I would imagine a lion in a zoo does. Right? I was just like, I can be here and I can do this and I can do this work, but this is not my environment. This is not my calling, right? I'm being shackled. I'm being restrained. I'm not the kind of person who's just built to be working in an office for the next 30 to 40 years. Like, that was very obvious to me from my early 20s. And I guess being in my early 20s as well, another thing I could do is like 90% of the people I worked with were older than me. Mm-hmm. So I was working with people who were in their late 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, even in their 60s. So I could ask a very simple question, which is that in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, do I want to be like this guy?
Yep.
Right? Not in a harsh way, just like, is that, these are generally decent people. But for me, it was a resounding no. I was just like, no, when I'm 50, I don't still want to be in this type of environment. I don't want to be doing this type of work. And it wasn't just, I don't want to be doing this. It's like, I also know what I want to do. I want to use my voice to inspire, motivate, and uplift other people. I thought I would do that just through my music. And what's happened since I left that job is I've still do my music, but I've expanded it into other areas, like doing this interview we're doing right now, like starting my own podcast, writing my own books, becoming a public speaker, doing whatever the heck it is that I do on social media. It's like I can use my voice through different mediums to continue to inspire and impact millions of people. So my thinking wasn't very difficult. I get a lot of people asking, was it hard for me to make the decision? And honestly, it wasn't. It was a little bit scary because I was going from something very predictable to something completely unpredictable, right? I was working a job where on the 30th of every month, I get deposited X thousand pounds into my bank account, like clockwork. It doesn't matter what work I do or what work I don't do or whatever, as long as I'm obviously doing enough work to keep my job. Cool. It's just predictable. Every month, boom. Every month, boom. Every month, and so that can be on one hand, it can be boring, but on another hand, it's like that's what people seek. Most people seek that comfort and seek that security. That's like, cool. Like you've kind of quote unquote made it. So to give that up and go into something where it's like, okay, like I don't have a salary anymore. I don't have a boss. I don't have a manager. I did my music stuff independently and still do. So it wasn't even like, okay, I got signed to a record label and then they're like funding me and promoting me. It was just like, it's all on me. If I wake up and I decide to do nothing, I earn nothing, right? Like I've got nothing. Even if I get out there and I decide to put in work, I'm not even really in control of it because I could have I'm sure I used to sell my CDs on the street and stuff, and you can't really predict it. You can go, you have good days, you have bad days. Sometimes you go out there and you crush it and you're feeling like, yeah, awesome, I'm on the right path. You have other days where you're just standing around all day. Keep in mind, it's in the UK. It might be raining. It might be snowing. The weather's garbage. No one wants to stop and talk to you. You're just like not in the right place, whatever. And You sell a handful of CDs a day. Sometimes you don't even break even, right? What it cost you to get to the city and to accommodate yourself isn't even what you're making. So, I mean, I did that journey for over a decade because I actually was selling prior to going full time with it.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing that kept me going was really just being clear on what the bigger mission was, and just having the faith that the process is going to work out, right? Like, I don't know if it's going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I don't know exactly what this is going to look like. I don't know exactly how it's going to develop, but if I keep on putting one foot in front of the other, I will, quote unquote, make it. And my first goal also was simply to be able to keep myself afloat.
Mhm.
So if I'm being totally honest, from like 2011 to 2018, 2019, I was just kind of breaking even or making like a very small profit per
Mhm.
year. So I was making enough to accommodate myself, feed myself, get to the places I want to go, like do the sort of basics with my music and continue to keep making music. But I wasn't like saving a lot. I wasn't having enough money to like invest or to, I don't know, buy a house or a lot of the things that my peers and my friends who had gone into investment banking jobs or, consulting or, like the normal, there was a time period where it was like, gosh, like you sort of feel a bit like you're falling behind, right?
Yeah.
I've got a very high achieving circle of friends, right? I went to Oxford University, like all my friends are high powered, whatever. So by the time, let's say you're 30 years old, if you've been in investment banking from the age of 21 up until 30, right? By the time you're 30, like you're doing pretty well. Whereas for me, like by the age of 30, like it was weird because I had some level of success,
Mhm.
but the amount of work I was doing versus the numbers in the bank account or versus like some other metrics, it wasn't really adding up. It was kind of like, Um, but one thing I always had was I always had autonomy and freedom that my peers didn't have.
Yeah.
Right. So I might call one of my friends on Saturday afternoon and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, man, I'm still at the office, like, late night, whatever. And I'm like, man, that sucks. Right. I'm out here. I'm out here going on adventures, traveling to different cities, doing shows in cool places, touring in the UK and overseas and whatever. So cool. Like I might not have the money in my bank account, but I'm doing what I want to do and I'm calling the shots and all of that. So my metric was never just like, how much money am I making? Right. I think if that had been my metric, that would have actually caused me to quit,
Mhm.
because that would have been like, oh, okay, I've been doing this for 5 years and I'm not making as much money as I used to be doing in my corporate job. So let me give up. And I think that far too many people do that. I think oftentimes people fail. I think I've ever made this point before. I think a lot of people fail because they get caught up on the wrong metrics, right? They'll start a podcast like you're doing, and they'll be comparing themselves to like the biggest podcasters in the game, and they're
Yep.
like, oh my gosh, that guy's getting 10 million downloads per episode, and I'm getting 500, so I'm going to quit. Or I met a guy who quit a podcast, like he'd been doing it for 6 months, and he quit because he was quote unquote getting only 20,000 listens per episode. I was like, you quit getting, I was like,
Are
you were
you
getting
kidding me?
20,000.
Are you
Exactly. I was like, you're getting 20,000. I was like, you quit. I was like, what on earth? Like, are you crazy? Like, what were you comparing yourself to? Do you know how many people 20,000 people is? That's like an arena. You've
yeah,
got
for just
20,
one yeah.
yeah. And for something you've been doing for 6 months, I was like, dude, you're crazy. Right. Um, so yeah, as they say, comparison is the thief of joy. So I think you run your own race, you pay attention to your own thing, and you don't get just caught up on the vanity metrics, right? Because you don't judge, I don't think it would be wise to judge the success of this podcast based on simply how many people listen to it,
Mhm.
right? The people who did listen, how much did it impact them? How much did you learn from it? Right? What are you going to take from it? Like, so I think in the sort of internet and social media world in particular, all we see generally are the vanity metrics. You don't see the depth. You don't see the depth of, for example, I'm sure James, right? You'd probably what would you rather have? Would you rather have 100,000? Would you rather have 1 million followers, of which like not, they're just like very lukewarm, or would you rather have 50,000 followers who like really, really, really love you and like what you're doing and support and what? Like the latter is way better,
Yep.
but but that's not visible to the public, right? There's people who, dude, there's organizations who have like tens of millions of followers or whatever. And like, you've got accounts that have like 10,000 people and they've got more engagement because they've got more depth. They've got more trust. Like the people are so, that's another thing that I guess people don't really see. And you don't see how would I put it? Like everything that I'm doing and I'm achieving now, if I hadn't put in all that work in my late teens and my 20s and my early 30s or whatever, like none of the cool things that are happening now would happen. They wouldn't be possible. But you don't see that until you're looking backwards. Does that make sense? Like at the time, it can feel like, why am I doing this? Or like, this is not paying off, or I'm not appreciated as I should be, or I'm not earning as much as I should be, or whatever. But you're not kind of seeing what's happening behind the scenes and internally because there's no way to measure it. So yeah, I think a lot of people get discouraged because they really get caught up in the wrong metrics, and they're just constantly looking at like analytics and views and followers and this and this and this, and they're expecting some type of linear growth, and then they don't see it, and they're just like, you know what, this isn't working. I'm going to go do something else. Whereas had they just kept going, very often you would find, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might be 15, it might be 20, but it'll get to some type of breaking point where some type of success is achieved. And then you'll look back and be like, okay, that's why. Like I can look back now at the years that I spent talking to hundreds of thousands of people on the street and selling my CDs and getting rejected. Like all of that has given me such a ridiculous advantage in life at this point. At the time, I didn't really realize, okay, this is how this is going to help me, right? My goal was just like sell CDs and make enough money to keep myself afloat. But now when people are like, dude, how are you so good at talking? How are you so good at communicating with people? How are you so good at like dealing with rejection or whatever? I was like, bro, I've spoken to 500,000 people face to face. I've had hundreds of thousands of people say no to me, right? Say no or just straight up ignore me or whatever. So you think a mean comment on Twitter is gonna derail me, right? Like, of course I can talk to anyone, right? I can travel to any city, any country. I can talk to anybody. I can go on any podcast. I can have anyone on my podcast, whatever. I'm so used to talking to people. And that's just because I put in those reps for such a long period of time and got that unique skill set, which is actually very rare, perhaps becoming even more rare because I think people talk to each other face to face even less now than they used to. So yeah, it all plays together, man. It all plays together.
I have so much to say on this because I love this topic in itself. The one thing I want to say first and foremost is you're right. People talk about the metrics, but they don't see what I call invisible progress, right? The stuff that you don't see, whether this podcast is growing to getting more listens or not, right? I'm getting better as a communicator. I'm building relationships I wouldn't be able to build otherwise. There's so much that comes from this that is outside of that. And you're right. I mean, that's the reason you've been able to stay consistent for so long. You went from the streets to shopping centers to you've grown and grown and grown. There's one common thread that I find with almost everyone I speak to, and it's this idea of delusional optimism, the belief that you knew it was going to happen regardless of whatever it was. If you didn't stop, success was going to happen in some way. Where do you think that comes from for you?
Fantastic question, man. The honest answer is it comes from God.
Yeah.
I remember in my late teens. I remember in my late teens just, praying a lot and thinking a lot and spending a lot of time by myself, just working out what it is I really wanted to achieve in my lifetime, and allowing enough sort of quietness for God to speak to me. For someone who doesn't believe in God, this might sound like sort of weird and kooky to them, but just having those moments where I'm just like, okay, like what is my calling? Is my calling to just be quote unquote normal? And I'm not knocking normal, by the way, but to kind of just be a 9-to-5er and do that, get a mortgage, just do the kind of normal, secure, stable path? Or is my calling different? And it was really obvious to me that God was calling me to make an impact on the world, right? Not to like for millions of people to know who I am. Not because not under some like fake celebrity or fame status seeking thing, but just like, look, you've been given a set of talents and experiences and a certain personality that can go out there and make like a real real positive dent and impact. Like I felt that from my teens. So knowing that and feeling genuinely like, okay, this is something that has come from God. And by the way, the translation of my name means God's decision. So Zuby is short for Nzubechuku, and that means God's decision in the Igbo language of Nigeria. And I take that, I took that seriously. So I was like, all right, like this is not just like about me and about the material world, but like I have been put here, you know, to like just make some real positive impact. Before I die, there's going to be millions of people who know and appreciate me and who in some way, some form, I've influenced them in a positive way. So that was it. And then I think on a sort of practical point, I think one thing that really helped was looking into other people's stories, a little bit like what you're doing right now with this podcast, right? Reading people's autobiographies, right? Whatever celebrity or successful person or entrepreneur, like looking into their life, not just looking at, oh, what are the cool things that they're doing now and what are the successes they're having now, but you know, what did they go through in their childhood? How many businesses did they try and fail? Like if you look into most entrepreneurs' backgrounds, most of them have been bankrupt at some point. If you look at most entertainers, musicians or whatever, like they were playing to empty venues or like their groups had broke up or they had got screwed over, but right, like they've been through a lot of crap that that the public doesn't generally see. So I saw this in all of these different stories, reading and talking to people, and I was like, okay, it's not a linear upwards path. It's not just like, cool, you get on the elevator and you work hard and it keeps going up. It's like, nope, there's times that it goes down. There's time that it's just stagnant for years on end. There's times where you've got, but like you said, you know, that invisible progress is still happening, but it's not just upwards. It's like, you know, it's a little bit like a stock market, right? Like it generally trends upwards, but you've got corrections, you've got full on recessions, you've got times where, and that's just how it goes. So even when I had moments when I was like, gosh, what am I doing? Or like, why am I doing this? Why don't I just go back to, you know, doing something simple? It was just that was always only a fleeting thought, because I was like, nope, this is just paying the dues. This is just the crap I got to go through right now so that I can have the success later on. And I guess I'd also experienced it myself, particularly say with I've been going to the gym since I was like 15. I've been training for a long time, and I know on that, again, it's not linear progress. It's not just like you keep on getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and your muscles keep growing and grow. You know, you have injuries, you have setbacks, you have times where like things kind of fall off the wagon a little bit. You have times where you eat too much and you get a little bit fat. You have times where right? So again, I was just like, okay, it's the same logic in everything, right? This is just the way of the world. It's just the way of humanity. So there was that. And then I think the last thing, and this is really important, this is incredibly important, and it also ties into the question you were asking me about the importance of travel.
Yeah.
And this is also that you learn to enjoy the process. If you genuinely enjoy the process, like I love going out and selling my CDs on the street, man. Every single day, whatever city I was in, it was like, I have no idea who I'm going to meet. I have no idea like what I'm going to bump into, what I'm going to see. So every single day, it was just an adventure. So whether I sold 50 CDs or I sold 7 CDs, it was like, cool, this was an adventure. I discovered a new city. I met hundreds of new people. I saw something interesting. So it's just you enjoy the process. Again, you don't get caught up just in the metrics and the trajectory. You genuinely enjoy it. And as long as you're having fun with it, it's very easy to stick to things that you enjoy. Absolutely. So if you can find a way to make something fun, then consistency actually becomes very easy. So I learned how to embrace both the good and the bad. And I guess I also have a sense of humor. So even when it was kind of like sucky, I could see the funny. I don't know. There's something funny about like traveling 400 miles from home to go like promote your CDs, and then it just like starts snowing, and you're just standing there like what the heck? Like a year ago, I was like sitting in an office in London, working a nice cushy corporate job, and now I'm here in Newcastle and it's snowing and no one wants to talk to me, and like I'm staying in some crappy cheap hotel because I'm trying to keep my costs down and whatever. and you just burst out into laughter, and you're just like, this is hilarious. Like, what am I doing? Like, God, like, what is this mission that you have put me on? But then again, like I said, you look back in hindsight and you're like, you know what? That's cool, right? Like that's cool. And so you maintain the good, you maintain a happy demeanor, and you can deal with a lot of things in this world.
Man, I love it. I want to touch on because you leaving your job, right? You went to Oxford and then you had this opportunity, and like you said, there's everyone's looking at you like you should continue down that path. I tell a lot of people is I've spoke with a lot of people through the podcast that they're never really afraid to take that leap because they feel like they're being pulled towards something rather than being pushed towards it. And so it's like that calling that you feel like you need to actualize in your life, and so it makes sense that you were able to stick through it for so long. And just your journey is so powerful, man, and all the stuff that we touch on I just get so excited for. I Like you said, I mean, if you get excited for it, there's no, you don't want it to end. It's like this podcast. Like if I were to think that the goal is to get to X amount of downloads, I'm missing out on being able to speak with you in a person every week, which that's the whole point of it, right? There's another quote that you said from Twitter that I feel like I could take just excerpts from Twitter, and that could be a podcast in itself. But you're always building or destroying outwardly or inwardly. I'd love for you to dive on that because I love that perspective. I think a lot of people don't think too deeply about that.
Yeah, sure thing. And I think as I said this, I think I related it to boys and men in particular.
Yeah.
You could expand it to both sexes, but I think particularly when it comes to the male sex, like I said, I believe that men are always building or destroying. If you look through history, like that's basically what history is. It's
Yeah.
people, primarily men, like building stuff and destroying stuff, creating empires, creating civilizations, inventing things, and then going to war and knocking down other empires and civilizations and killing things or killing themselves. And I just don't really think that there's a neutral, right? If you were to just wake up tomorrow and stay in bed and not do anything, that's not neutral. That's destructive, right? If you were to do that for weeks on end, literally, like your muscles would begin to atrophy.
Hmm.
You'd begin to gain body fat. You'd start to feel more and more depressed and anxious. You'd just feel very off. Your health would start to suffer. Um, and the people around you would be, getting concerned, and your friends would be like, "Hey, what's happened to James?" And your family would be, right? Like it's a destructive activity. I don't think that there's a neutral. I
Hmm.
think that, what you're doing, what we are doing right now, this is constructive. We are in the process of creating. So I think both individually and at scale, that's just how it goes. I think also with men in particular, right? Like we have testosterone, so we're more competitive
Yeah.
and generally, more aggressive than the fairer sex, and that can manifest in different ways, right? You can channel that and go build and create cool things. You can create art. You can create a business. You can create relationships. You can create a family. You can build whatever it is that you want to build or construct. You can do it. And I find that when a young man or even an older man is not engaged in that, they tend to destroy themselves and or each other people,
Yep.
right? Sorry, they tend to destroy themselves and or others. They start to, this can manifest in different ways, right? You've obviously got the extremes where people quite literally destroy themselves or other people. Leading cause of of men in the UK,
Suicide.
right? Self-deletion, suicide. Very similar in the USA, right? Lots of suicide, drug overdoses, drinking too much alcohol, like all of these things. So people quite literally destroy themselves. You've also got the extreme situations of, violent activity, people who go out and assault and murder and harm and kill other people. Um, it's like that energy always comes out in some way. If you want to see a much more sort of mild and common version of this, it's just like haters, right? Hater activity, right? Being that person who just spends all their time on the internet, just you're spending hours a day just, leaving mean comments and downvoting people and trolling people and just attacking and insulting people who are complete strangers, right? People who haven't done
Yeah.
anything to you, and you're just there, like, instead of building your own empire, right? Instead of going out there and creating your own podcast, you want to go and like attack other people who are creating podcasts. Instead of like making your own YouTube channel, you want to go and like hate on other people who are making YouTube channels. Instead of making your own music or creating your own art, you just find people who are already making art and you tell them how much it sucks and how much they suck and how you like want them. And it's just like, and I can't help but note 90% of people who do that are male, right? Like it's actually, it's like trolling and hating on the internet is primarily like a male thing. So it's like even when you change the technology, you find a way, like people just sort of use the technology to do the same things and live out the same patterns. So that's why I'm so keen on encouraging people to build themselves in different ways. It's why I love the gym and fitness and strength training. It's like, cool, like, hey man, build yourself up. And the thing is also, while you're engaged in that, it makes you feel good. It builds your own self-esteem. It builds your own confidence and competence. And also it snuffs out the time that you have and the energy that you would have to be dissipating into things that are destructive, right? If you stay busy, if you stay exercising and working on your business and hanging out with your friends and building relationships and all that, like you don't have time. You don't have time to engage in destructive stuff.
Yep.
What do they say, right? Idle hands are, the devil's work or the devil's playground, right? If you want to, I can't remember who said it. I think maybe it was Grant Cardone. He said something like, if you want to meet the devil, leave loads of empty space in your calendar, right? And so he's just saying, like, if you're not busy, if you're just sort of sitting around not doing anything, then the temptation to do bad things increases, right? You're just, there's, like I said, I just don't think there's just not a neutral, right? You're always doing something. Even if you're doing nothing, like you're doing something. You're having physical activity or not, or there's something going on that's in your mind. You might be thinking of all kinds of destructive thoughts and talking down to yourself and all of that. And honestly, I mean, it's kind of interesting as well, because this links into something that's a very sort of popular term these days, which is mental health. And if you think, again, I'm just thinking out loud here because I've never expressed this publicly or even privately, but if you kind of think of like what even is mental health, it's kind of like what's the narrative, what's the invisible narrative that you're telling yourself day to day about yourself. Yeah, like what's the narrative, what's the story you're constantly telling yourself about the world, about yourself, about other people. And that's something we can't see it visibly, but each person has their story just running, right? And someone with very poor mental health, they've got like a bad or a completely irrational or delusional or harmful story that they're just constantly running. Whereas someone who is mentally healthy, they've got a positive story that's running. So day by day, that's what it is. So this is not like a minor thing. This is something that's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful to the point that it's like actually a whole field of medicine and science, and people literally go to war with their own minds, and sometimes they lose. And that's actually scary. Like that's a warning of what can happen if you allow those sort of destructive tendencies to just run without ever keeping them in check and without ever changing the story and making those efforts.
It's the emphasis of this podcast to help people unlearn the beliefs that they hold about themselves, right? Like I think if I've said this a few times, but if there was a politician that was able to change their beliefs about the way that they go about the world, I would probably vote for them just because they're able to change their beliefs. Like so many people hold like these absolutes in life, which is so just hold us to a standard that we're not able to evolve if we hold such foundational things in our mind. I have like 1,000 more questions for you, but there's 2 more I want to get off before we jump off.
Sure.
We're gonna have to do
no doubt, man. Let's do it.
You are an author, a musician, you've done coaching, you've done so many different things. And a person I had on the podcast a little bit ago was that the best book that you can write, or the best book that you can gain from like knowledge from, is the one that you write for yourself. I'm curious, out of all the things that you've done, what has taught you the most about yourself?
That's a great question. I'll be honest with you, man. I would say the whole time period of just hustling, like the real hustle, like selling my CDs on the street and then selling my music and merchandise in shopping centers. I don't think I realized it at the time, but when I think about it in hindsight of what really sort of formed and strengthened a lot of my skill sets and abilities and just building an incredibly resilient mindset, it was that. It was that, because it's hard. It's actually really, really hard to do, and to do it consistently and to just keep on going and going and going and going for over a decade, like which is a very long time. I would say that it's that. I think that had I not forged myself in that sort of fire, then And I think this is probably doubly important for me because I'll be honest. I mean, thank God, I came from I've lived a good life, right? I'm from a stable household. I have wonderful parents. I have wonderful siblings. I grew up in a safe environment. I wasn't surrounded by like crime or gang activities. Like there's all sorts of stuff that various people get involved in, right? Or even just being born into certain types of poverty and dealing with all of the stuff that comes with that. I came from the flip side of that type of environment. So I think for me in particular, it was good to essentially voluntarily make my life a lot harder than it needed to be,
Yeah.
and to do that for a long period of time and then develop a certain strength and resolve, which otherwise I don't think I would have had fully developed. I would have just, lived my life on easy mode for the entirety of my lifetime. And I choose deliberately to make it harder. I know that's something Jordan Peterson talks about, like voluntarily taking on more responsibility, voluntarily picking up the cross and carrying it, that kind of thing. So I don't want to equate my story to people who have dealt with like real,
Of course.
real bad stuff or anything like that. But just making that choice and being willing to go through it. One thing that did actually make it harder, which is kind of on the flip side of it, is knowing in the back of my mind that I had an easier option available.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So in some ways, one could argue that it's kind of easier in some ways if there is no alternative, because then
Mhm.
you just like you have to keep going. Right. It's totally sink or swim. But I think with me, like I always knew, like, one of the things that was hard was doing it when it's like I don't have to do this. Right. I could just be like, you know what, call up my old workplace or email them, and be like, you know what, cool, like I'm done. I'm gonna just like come back and do the normal thing. There was like a very easy way out, and yeah, just to kind of snuff out that temptation and stay the course and just be like, all right, like no, let me do what my calling is. Let me live out my calling, um, even though it's not um it's not currently where I want it to be, but I know that I can make it get there.
Yeah, it's the voluntary suffering that most successful people, those are the most successful people, it seems. One last question I ask every guest. My question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
Mm, that's a great question. What belief am I currently unlearning? Mm, I guess I'm always hmm, I guess I'm always unlearning the idea or the notion or the fact that I can't do I can't and I don't have to do everything all the time. I'm a very highly conscientious person.
For sure.
So people who are highly conscientious, we tend to get guilty when we are not like always being productive and
Like,
always doing more. And so being able to kind of being able to like relax
yeah.
a little bit and just be like, okay, like I work hard, I'm ambitious, I'm ambitious, I'm trying to do all these things, but also it's okay. Like I don't need to be, checking my emails at 9 p.m. I don't need to be like, right. Like it's okay to just chill sometimes. I think I've gotten better at that. I think I spent like 15 years just in constant grind mode. And now I'm in a position where it's like, okay, like I'm still in grind mode, but you don't need to just stay busy all the time. You don't need to just stay busy. And that's not even just like something you don't have to do, but it's potentially detrimental overall. So to kind of know how hard to work and how much to do and when to do it, but also know when it's cool to just like relax and enjoy life and do other things and, tend to my relationships and all that kind of stuff.
Right with you on that, man. Thank you for your
Yeah.
time. All of your links, of course, will be in the show notes, but is there anywhere you'd like to direct people?
All good. If you're listening, you can check out all of my music and my podcasts as well on all of the usual platforms: YouTube, Apple Podcasts / Apple Music, Spotify. Just search my name, Zuby, Zuby, and check it out. And yeah, check out the music, check out the podcast. I've got a lot of stuff out there from accumulated over the years, so enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cheers, James.
I have this crazy goal of getting this podcast to over 10,000 subscribers in the next 3 months. Here's how you can help. Over 96.6% of people that view this podcast are not subscribed. So if you've got even a little bit of information or inspiration from this podcast, I please ask you to subscribe. Help me help more people, and let's get into the podcast.